Hello and welcome to Giant Talk, everyone that's just joining us, the world's first OKR podcast in partnership with Koan. And today, obviously, we're coming to you live. Today you have me, Jenny, as host, and Lawrence, Matt and Scott are joining us for what promises to be a fantastic discussion as always. So during the next hour or so, we'll be talking teams and how you can encourage your teams to take OKRs seriously, something that's really important. But before we dive in, I just wanted to give a quick note on questions. So you'll see there's a chat function in Podbean. So if you've got any questions during the chat, please feel free to drop them in there and we'll pick them up as soon as we can. So let's get started. So for anyone that doesn't know you, Lawrence, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Jenny. It's rare that I'm not with a Labour Giants representative on the panel today. I've moved myself from host to guest. So I've been the host of Giant Talk for about 18 or so, I suppose. Then when I'm not I'm head of OKR projects and operations within. So working with clients all over the world remotely now, as it is, to do OKR implementation and coaching and really help them get their OKR efforts running as smoothly and to gain the most impact from OKRs as possible.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. Matt, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Matt Tucker, the CEO and co-founder of Koan. I'm excited to join another episode of Giant Talk to discuss a topic that feels like one that is really near and dear to our hearts, which is how to really make OKRs work amazingly well at the team level, which, as we all know, that's where all the real work gets done. And so if you can really connect what's happening in the strategic vision to the work getting done, that's a lot of where the magic happens. So excited for this topic.
Perfect, thank you. And lastly, and definitely not least, Scott, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Scott Campbell, co-founder of Koan, and excited to be a part of the conversation.
Perfect, thanks, Scott. So let's dive in. So we know that OKRs can really help align and drive teams forward towards growth. But as with any change, there can be resistance. So why do you think some teams or individuals don't take OKRs seriously? And I'm going to put that to you, Lawrence, as an opener, please.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I think there's really maybe 3 or 4 reasons why certain individuals or certain teams don't take the whole OKR process and initiative seriously. I've seen it in lots of my clients, and I'm sure the guys from Koan have seen it in some of the guys that they've onboarded too. And I think, the reasons are kind of either that they've seen them fail in the past, because the implementation correctly. And that's not necessarily in your business. That might have been businesses that they were in previously. Could be that they've seen similar initiatives fail in the past, similar objective setting, similar goal setting and performance management, performance development type things. If they've seen those not work in the past, they might just be a bit numb to it all. The biggest threat really, though, with OKRs, and this was proven in our 29 OKR research that you can find online, is really the perception that senior leadership aren't taking them seriously. And if there's this perception within the business that the senior management teams aren't really bought into the OKR process or aren't giving as much gusto to it as is being asked of the individuals at a team level, then that's really not going to help OKRs thrive in the business, because people have this probably reasonable mindset of, well, if they're not willing to put the effort in, then why should we? And I think that's a really, really dangerous thing that I've seen multiple times happen, is that the senior leadership team want to have all the amazing outcomes from OKRs that OKRs can bring, but aren't really willing to put in the effort themselves to make it happen.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. I suppose Matt and Scott, you've probably seen similar things, but anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just pick up on Lawrence's comment around, we've seen OKRs fail before, and maybe this isn't the business process for me. Is there some word for an irrational fear of anything with acronyms and being represented by letters? That might be part of this too. There's often this question of what's in it for me down at the team level and down at the individual level. And I think that can be exacerbated by what Lawrence pointed out, which is, well, hey, if I don't see the senior leadership taking this seriously and investing the time in it, why should I put a bunch of time in it myself? And if I do put some time into reporting and tracking on this, what do I get out of it, and what ultimately is the value to me? So I imagine a lot of the conversation we're going to have today is what are some things you can do to make sure that OKRs are providing a ton of value down at the team level and individual level. But ultimately, it often comes down to that for me, which is either I don't understand how OKRs are going to provide value to me or to our team. I don't believe that they're going to, or wow, they actually aren't providing value because something's going wrong with how we're running the process.
Yeah, just to jump in on that as well. We found that teams definitely get a little defocused and not, don't really embrace the OKR methodology when they don't feel like their work is really reflected in the OKRs themselves. So if they feel like the OKRs are too highly set, too ethereal, too company level-ish versus the individual team and what they're actually working on, then that can obviously be a disconnect. And in that scenario, you typically have a situation where the work that they're doing on a regular basis doesn't get recognized as well as part of the OKR process. When reviews of OKRs are done, the massive amount of work that they've been doing on a regular basis just isn't recognized as being a big contribution to the organization itself. So that can be very demoralizing for a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Scott just touched on it there about kind of what the implications are if people don't take them seriously. But Lawrence, in your experience, kind of if people or teams or individuals aren't taking OKRs seriously, what are those implications for the business?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, really, I suppose there's the biggest fear is that a company isn't going to hit its growth targets. If suddenly one or two teams or individuals aren't taking OKRs seriously, the problem is that this can derail the whole process really quite quickly. It can have a catalyst effect. And as soon as, I see you not taking them seriously, and I don't see Scott taking them seriously, and I don't see Matt as my manager taking them seriously, why am I going to keep on taking them seriously? Talk about kind of, wasted effort. So it can really derail the whole process. And depending what you brought OKRs in to do, usually to hit growth targets, something around growth, change, and innovation, you're really putting those in danger. And actually, in this environment that we're currently in, it might be that you're just not going to keep the lights on. If you really are setting your stall out and setting these objectives because you're in a dangerous position as a business right now, and people are not taking the objectives that are being set seriously, then that might be enough to completely derail the business. Which means it's not good enough to just say, oh, well, that's just what so-and-so's like. You've got to deal with these things head on, or that toxic culture will be created. Those silos will go up. And you could have a real problem on your hands quite quickly.
Absolutely. I think to look at how to get teams to take them seriously, does it come down to involvement with them from the outset? And Matt, I'll put that one to you, please.
It certainly helps. And so one.
Have we lost Matt?
Did we lose Matt?
Scott, are you okay to pick that one up?
Yeah, certainly. In terms of how the implications towards the business, obviously, if everyone isn't marching the right direction or the same direction, I think that can obviously create some serious challenges for the business overall. one of the, and I think we're going to, get to this in a little bit actually, but one of the common failings we find in the OKR process itself is that managers are the ones, or VPs or executives are only the ones that are reporting on progress towards goals. And of course, if that's the case, you get a situation where, unfortunately politics kind of, come into play a little bit because, managers want to look good up throughout the organization. But most importantly, what you also find is a situation where the team members themselves actually have a lot more information about, what is going on within the organization itself, right? What is the impeding process or progress? What's themselves on a regular basis is really a great way to facilitate great conversations and really understand, where the pivot points are for the business. What are the opportunities that can be addressed? What are the challenges? And then creating, really good conversations around that. So you're not just, reporting on progress itself, but you're obtaining information through the methodology. And that's, one of the biggest benefits that you get.
Great, thanks, Scott. I'm not sure if Matt's back with us.
I hope I am.
You are, loud and clear.
Okay,
loud and
great.
clear.
It seemed to be having extra technical difficulties today, and I'm even losing some of the audio from Scott and Lauren. So I'll cross my fingers that this goes better as we keep going.
Great stuff. I'll put that question back to you then, Matt, now you're with us. So to get teams to take OKRs seriously, does it come down to involvement from the outset then?
Teams involved early on. Let me know if my audio messes up again, please. But that is not only in pitching them on the idea and involving them, like the why of we're doing OKRs, and bringing them on board with and framing why are we doing this business process, why are we going to invest time in this, what's in it for the company, what's in it for all of you, and then getting deep into the planning process as well. It's a lot more engaging to be part of the conversation and to help define what outcomes we're trying to achieve, rather than just being handed a list of tasks to do. So having teams involved early on is a great way of building some engagement.
So if you just to frame that question, I guess, slightly, does that mean that even if you work in a really large organization, that everyone should be involved when it comes to OKRs, setting OKRs?
I certainly think so. We've had some conversations in previous podcasts around this idea of, and the one caveat I'll give is this idea we talked about before of OKRs really being a spotlight in the business. It's not usually the case that every single team and every single individual might be working on OKRs every single quarter. In some quarters, it might be your part of the business is really focused on just maintaining some health metrics or KPIs, while other parts of the business have the spotlight shined on them with goals or OKRs. So assuming that you are working on something that's critical and that you're trying to achieve in some fundamental way, having that deep involvement and really looking for opportunities to, Lawrence has talked about this previously in an articulate way, looking for opportunities to let the people and the teams that are actually going to do the work and to have a leadership position or leadership role with those OKRs, rather than it just only and always being the executive team leading any particular initiative. That's another great way to drive involvement.
Great, thanks, Matt. We've actually had a question which kind of touches on what you've just been talking about. It's what about a scenario where senior leadership is quite keen on OKRs and spending time to get it right, but the rest of the organisation is struggling to buy into it? How can you help the teams see the benefits? And we'll come on to this later, but I just wanted to put that to you now, Lawrence, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a great question. I think this really, for me, all boils down to communication. It's unlikely that you're going to have a whole organization that are refusing to buy into the process. If you do, there's something wrong with your recruitment policy. But really, being serious, it comes down to what you're communicating. And Matt really started. It's not good enough just saying to people, "Oh, by the way, from next quarter, we're going to be doing OKRs." Because 9 out of 10 people probably won't even know what OKRs are. Never mind what you want to do with them. And this is exactly what Matt was talking about. It's about setting the scene for the whole organization. And this might take, a 2 or 3 hour sort of town hall style meeting, or even multiple communications, or even putting together resources to send to people to explain what they are. But it's all about why you're introducing OKRs for the business. What you're looking to see change. How will you know if OKRs have been successful in 12 months, for example, could be part of it. But also explaining what the impact's going to be on those individuals. Because change is scary. Change is always scary, no matter which part of the business you're in. So you've really got to be quite cognizant of that and understand that that's where you need to start when you're talking to individuals on a basis of what it means to them. Even down to the real nitty-gritty of how is it going to tie into pay, how is it going to tie into bonuses, how is it going to affect job descriptions, how is it going to affect who they work with on a day-to-day basis, because we would encourage people to use OKRs to create cross-functional working, which means the teams they're working in might be slightly impacted. And the problem is that if you just say to somebody, right, from 1st of September, next week, we're going to be working towards OKRs. The major problem with that is they'll probably go away and Google OKRs, be kind of confronted online with 1,000 different interpretations of what OKRs are and what they've done in their business, which means they're just going to be even more confused. So really, to answer that question, the senior management team have done a really decent amount of work deciding what OKRs mean to that business, mean to the individuals of that business, and then be able to communicate that in a really coherent and concise way. Probably a much better way than I've just answered that question.
No, it sounded pretty good to me, Lawrence. So something you touched on then was about cross-functional working. And our next question centers around kind of the assignment of OKRs. So OKRs are generally assigned to one owner. So if you've got a team where members don't have any OKRs assigned to them, how do you get them to take them seriously? And I'll put that to Scott, please, first.
So if a team member doesn't have anything assigned to them in particular, is that the
yeah, that's it. So so they don't have anything assigned to them specifically.
Yeah, well, hopefully that's not the case. Certainly, especially in the Koan context, we believe in strong involvement from the team members. Teams are, again, where the hard work happens, and they, very rarely does a single individual actually influence a strategic goal. Usually it's at least 2 or 3 people. And oftentimes it's 2 or 3 people from across the organization, across different functional parts of the organization, across teams, across departments. In that scenario, what you should do is have a reporting structure that actually involves the team members from the various different teams that are involved in tackling that particular goal and soliciting their opinion. One of the challenges with implementing OKRs is kind of how you do it from a structural standpoint. And if you don't have a facility to that really helps assign cross-functional goals and limits, as I mentioned before, limits the reporting on goals to one individual, then you're going to be really challenged. So we've dealt with many clients that really kind of get hung up on the fact that they are oftentimes their particular goals dependent on another team, for example, in order to deliver a product or market the product with a new campaign, and that's going to affect their ability to achieve that goal. So soliciting those opinions, making sure that the various different cross-team members are assigned to goals, and creating or facilitating a way in which they can report on that on a regular basis really helps with collaboration and knowledge across the organization, so that you can actually assess the progress towards those goals appropriately.
Great, thanks, Scott. And I suppose, sorry, did you want to add something there, Lawrence?
Yeah, I just want to call out for Koan, really, because Scott's not done it there. Koan has an amazing contributor function. right? That means that just because somebody doesn't own it, and we are big advocates of only individually owning objectives and key results, not having multiple owners, that doesn't mean that you can't use the contributor function. And those contributors should be part of the check-ins. They should be part of the catch-ups, because they are working towards that OKR as well. They're just maybe not the one that's updating the system, or not the one that's reporting it back up the chain. So it's really important that there's full involvement there.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. And that leads me into nicely to another question that we had about the check-in process. And you mentioned it just there when you spoke, Lawrence, about how important that is. So to keep teams serious about OKRs, is that something that's really important? And what's your kind of top tips for that process, I guess, to keep people engaged?
How important the check-in process is?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, for me, the check-in process is vital. It's the lifeblood of the OKR system. It's what makes OKRs different to any of the other goal-setting frameworks that have come before it. There's no sort of apologies that it's taken some of the methodologies from Agile, etc., and applied those into a more higher level company-wide goal strategy system, and that's because it works. And it's what keeps the team supporting each other. It's what keeps everybody involved. What keeps everybody aware of what else is going on in the business. It keeps everybody aware of the dependencies. And, it's really about that. Okay, if somebody needs support on their OKR, and there's never any sort of conversations that happen to be able to provide that support, then how can it ever take place? And how can that person get the help they need, whether it's from their peers or their manager? So really, for me, check-ins are where OKRs live and die. If you've got no habit or routines around check-ins in your OKR process, you're going to end up with set and forget goals again, which really is what OKRs should be the opposite of.
So I love how Koan is designed with the team in mind. The team is really at the centre of the system, and it's about helping the team and the members of those teams, obviously, to really collaborate on how they work with OKRs. I mean, there's obviously full transparency across the system, which helps, and then the features that they have around feedback and being able to track levels of confidence and so on and so forth around and progress against OKRs. It's amazing, and because of that level of transparency, it builds accountability and fosters some great communication. So, yeah, I love how teams are just at the centre of the system.
We've had a question from Ross on the chat, and I'm going to open it up to all three of you for your feedback. He says, our agile teams aren't keen on working to a quarterly cadence, too waterfall, they say. Do you have any guidance on best practices for bringing OKRs to agile teams?
I'll jump in on that one. So great question. And we are big fans of quarterly OKR process being a great fit for a lot of different businesses and teams. But there's no hard and fast rule that that's the only approach you can take. Or an 8-week cycle, for example. And so there's no single hard and fast rule that quarterly is the only option. On the other hand, having a pretty specific cadence that is regular and dependable is really valuable, because it gives everyone certainty around knowing when planning is going to happen and that there's the right amount of time to measure outcomes. If you are doing a good job of defining your OKRs, it's not that, hey, we've written down the plan for everything we're going to do. OKRs are not a roadmap. If you're a product development organization, it is the big strategic things you're trying to accomplish and the ways you're going to measure whether you accomplish them. And so often what we'll see is in product organizations that are running with an agile process, and the OKRs they define are all about the larger outcomes that they're trying to achieve, and that can still work pretty well over a quarter-long basis. But then there's a separate process for actually doing roadmap and product releases. And the idea is usually let's define what we're trying to achieve, how we're going to measure it. Great, we've written that out as OKRs. They're high level. Anyone in the organization can understand it. Now, as product and engineering teams, we're going to figure out our plan and the roadmap to achieve it. We do it, we ship releases, we iterate, and we hope to be able to measure those effects and see the outcomes in the OKRs, whether those are quarterly or a little bit more often.
Great, thanks, Matt. Did Scott or Lawrence, did you have anything further to add to that answer to Ross?
I do not. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I do, Scott, okay? I basically just want to back up what Matt was saying at the end there. And this is where we see a classic error time and time again, where people think that OKRs have to be rolled out down to individual level or even down to every team level. They really don't. And this is exactly what Matt was saying there. If you've got a process that's working in your business already, don't try and overlay OKRs on top of it. You're just going to get it all mixed up and in a muddle. Of course, if you have one that isn't working properly, then yeah, replace it with OKRs, great. But really what you should be keeping in your head is this OKR that I'm now writing, whether it's a level 2 OKR or a level 3 OKR, is it adding anything strategically powerful to us here? And what I mean by strategically powerful is either it's giving people a much better way to report on the work they're doing, or it's keeping people laser focused on the goals that we want to achieve. If it isn't doing either of those things, then probably OKR isn't necessary. And we've worked with, well, almost every client we work with now, to be honest. We just set the goals for whether it's product teams, dev teams, a lot of tech teams that are working already to something like Agile or Waterfall or Scrum. We just keep the OKRs at quite a managerial level or quite a head of department level. So he can rile his team and know what they've got to work on and what they want the impact of those things to be. But don't try and get them working to a whole new hymn book. That is really where you're going to get things muddled up. So I guess our answer to the question, Ross, is just don't do it. You really don't have to do it unless it's really strategic necessity. Or if it's working for you, then carry on that and just set out those high-level goals for the teams.
Perfect. Thanks, Lawrence. Great question, Ross. We hope that answered it for you. I'm just going to pull the question slightly back to the serious approach from teams again. So something we hear quite regularly is set it and forget it is something that, and it can really contribute to teams not taking OKRs seriously. So Matt, how do teams avoid this set it and forget it approach?
I think it comes right to a comment Lawrence made around the check-in process being the essentially lifeblood of your whole OKR process. And it doesn't need to be super heavy. It doesn't need to be incredibly time-consuming. But if you don't have at least a lightweight structure to very regularly assess progress, then you're going to be in trouble. And there are a few different really common fail cases for OKRs, but set and forget is probably the most common of all. And we write down our goals, we show them to everyone at the beginning of the quarter, and then we never look at them again and never talk about them again. And so if instead you have a check-in process, in the Koan product, we call it a reflection. We love to see it happen either weekly or bi-weekly. And it's pretty simple. Generally speaking, it's for each key result, we make sure that we update the metric. We provide a confidence score, so a prediction about whether we are going to complete the key result by the due date. And you can do that as simply as a red, yellow, green type score. And then quick qualitative summary. What's going well? What have we accomplished? Where are we blocked? Where do we need help? And just having that lightweight structure and building a habit around it and a cadence just has a foundational difference in terms of the success of the business process.
Thanks, Matt. Scott, did you want to add anything additional to that?
I think the one thing that comes to mind is really a bit higher level, but I think a lot of organizations also don't establish an OKR champion, an OKR leader that is really focused on making sure that the organization is actually reporting on goals on a regular basis. It is not fire and forget. Keeping the teams aligned, modifying and adjusting the OKRs during the period if necessary. I mean, obviously, we just come out of. I guess we're in the middle of a very disruptive period in the world, right? So we always advocate flexibility. OKRs aren't intended to be. Well, I guess there are some purists out there that would definitely suggest you set OKRs and you don't change them, but you reflect at the end of that period. I think this last 6 months in the world has really led us to believe that goals should be flexible. You should be modifying those on not a regular basis. You don't want to do it just because you feel like you set artificially high goals or what have you. But if the world changes, if the business changes dramatically, it is definitely important to go and modify those goals. And usually that OKR champion is responsible for that type of discussion. And the OKR champion is really the one that's shepherding the rest of the business to make sure that they're reporting on goals on a regular basis and making sure that the entire process is healthy. So when I think of fire and forget, I also think of the scenario that I think Lawrence described earlier, where the managers are really the ones that are focused on OKRs and that entire process, and hopefully they're pretty well educated on how the actual methodology should be employed. But that's not a great scenario to be in. By properly enabling the entire organization to understand the OKR process, having a shepherd to facilitate those discussions, make sure you get regular updates. That's paramount. So I know that sounds, for some organizations, that sounds like it might be resource intensive, and that somebody would have to spend 100% of their time just managing the OKRs for their organization. In some cases, that's the right way to go. We often sometimes see chief operating officers, chiefs of staff really focus a lot of their effort, but typically that resource spends a good amount of time on the OKR facilitation itself, making sure that they're crafted appropriately, making sure there aren't duplicative goals or even conflicting goals within the organization. But that intensive effort is usually around a quarterly cadence. So 80% of the time might be spent actually doing the OKRs, making sure that they're done appropriately and enabling the organization to be successful just on that 2 or 3 week period before and at the beginning of a quarter. But hopefully that tails off, they get back to their day job, and then they go through that process again. So when I think of, again, fire and forget, that almost always I go directly towards who's the OKR champion and what are their responsibilities. Lawrence, what have you seen in that regard?
Yeah, you're spot on. Two things I'd like to add to what the guys have just said, because they've covered it really nicely, is that actually the reflections feature of any software, but Koan in particular, is a really good place to see who also isn't taking OKRs seriously, because they won't be doing their reflections on time, they won't be running their check-ins on time, they won't be updating their key results on time, and that should be dealt with head-on, because that will have further implications for the business. But also to pick up on what Scott was just saying there about the champions, it's all well and good having a champion and putting the champion in charge of the check-ins. I completely agree with that. However, this is usually a brand new thing for the champions as well, which means you've got to set them up for success. They need to be trained in how to run a good check-in. What does a good check-in look like? Should we be talking through every OKR? Or should we just be talking through the ones with low confidence? Should we be trying to involve every team member, or just the ones who own an OKR? All of these things need to be decided, designed, the OKR champion trained in the hows and whys of them for you to be able to get success with it in the business. Because you want the OKR champion to be spearheading that process. So if they don't know, then the rest of the managers and the team members have no chance. And just, by the way, on check-ins, there's no reason why team members, rather than team managers, can't run check-ins. everybody should be more than capable of running check-ins. And the more people you can get involved in running them, the more seriously OKRs are.
Great, thanks, guys. So just want to move it on to something that we touched on earlier, and I think you brought it up, Lawrence, about appraisals and performance management, and it's something that we often get asked about is appraisals, performance management and OKRs. So all three of you, basically, I wanted to ask what's your take on linking performance management to OKRs, and does this help or hinder your team when it comes to taking them seriously? So I'll come to you, Scott, first, if that's okay.
Of course. Yeah, we run into that question all the time. The short answer, I think, is, don't do it. And that's what most of the, OKR canon out there that's available suggests. However, and the reasons for that, and Matt, Lawrence, you can probably expand on it, is that, the OKRs are intended to be strategic in nature, right? They're not to-dos, they're not action items. You're supposed to pull or push the organization in a certain direction and focus energy in a certain direction. Not only for the company, of course, but the department and the individual teams. And hopefully, all those goals link up to top-level objectives. But if you, have that where you're trying to push or pull the organization in a fairly dramatic way, those OKRs or objectives should be aspirational in nature, right? And so they should be stretch goals in many cases. And if that's the case, then if you're tying compensation to stretch goals, then you can run into scenarios where over the course of time, those goals get easier and easier to attain because everybody wants to achieve their bonus, of course, and everybody wants to be able to perform, very well toward their, that part of the compensation that is variable or bonus based. So inherently, it's kind of antithetical to the OKR methodology to tie, individual performance and bonuses to OKRs themselves. On the flip side, we have seen it be successful when setting, company level bonuses. So if it, oftentimes depends, it may not be all the employees in the organization, it might be more management, VP level, C-level executives that are bonus based on achievement of objectives for the company overall. And we have seen that be successful. Making sure that obviously the people that are in charge, they're, focusing the organization, and it is, a measurement on management, perhaps more than individuals. I know that might be a little controversial, so I turn it over to the other two to get their opinions.
Yeah, I can jump in if you like.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Sorry, Matt. Yeah, I think Scott has nailed the question whether you should link OKRs to reward and compensation, appraisals, etc. And I think his take on company level objectives linking to bonuses can be well argued, to be honest, and can be quite sensible. If really that's where the C-suite and heads of department are pushing their effort and energy, then absolutely they should also be wise enough and I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but basically adult enough to be able to take on stretch targets and accept what the implications of those are. However, what I think Scott didn't quite touch on is whether linking these things or not linking these things, i.e. OKRs, appraisals, performance management, is going to help or hinder teams when it comes to taking OKRs seriously. And to be honest, I don't think doing it one way or doing it the other way will either help them or hinder them when it comes to taking them seriously. What will really hinder them is not having a consistent approach across the business or a consistent answer across the management team, which means you really have to have decided the answer before you tell everybody that you're doing OKRs. Because one of the first questions will be, well, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my pay? Is my bonus going to be linked to it at the end of this quarter? And if you don't know that answer, or if you give an answer that's different to your colleague or somebody else on the management team, you are asking for trouble. So really, make a decision and stick to it. And, that's the importance of the playbook exercise that we run. that Jenny, you're obviously very familiar with, but Matt and Scott, I know you guys are as well, where we help our clients make all these decisions prior to rolling them out to the rest of the organization. So these things are answered and there's clear and consistent messages happening at every single part of the organization at every single level. Doesn't matter if you're a multinational business with 100,000 employees or if you're 20 people, all based in a co-working space. It really doesn't matter. The consistency has to be there. And that's the most important thing when it comes to whether OKRs are going to be taken seriously, whether they're linked to those things or not linked to those things.
Matt, did you have something you wanted to add on that?
I strongly agree with both with what Lauren said and Scott. I'll just add one more angle to this, which is one more danger to explicitly linking performance management and OKRs together is that you're going to be heavily at risk of just making the whole process too complicated. It really resonated what Lauren said about, hey, don't overcomplicate this process. If you have your agile process and that's working well, don't assume that you have to replace that with OKRs. This idea of, hey, let's only add OKRs where there's actual value. And the challenge with performance management is as soon as you say this is linked to performance management, now you've almost trapped yourself into needing to have goals for every single individual in the entire organization. And now you're going to have organizational level goals, departmental level, team level, and individual level. Suddenly there's thousands and thousands of goals, even for a relatively small organization. And your chance at being able to beat the equation of time spent is less than the value received. It's going to be really hard to solve for that equation. So it's one more good reason to not explicitly link them.
Great, thanks, Matt, and thanks all for answering that question so explicitly. So today we've touched on implications of kind of teams and individuals not taking OKRs seriously. So if I come to you, each of you, and ask you for your kind of one main top tip when it comes to getting teams to take it seriously, I think that would be really useful for our audience and to round out the conversation nicely today. So Lawrence, I'm going to put you on the spot first for your top tip, please.
Joking. Stage top tip, which is design the process. There is an element of design to this when you're first implementing OKRs. Know the answer and then communicate thoroughly, and communicate on a personal level as well. So design, know the answer, communicate is my top tip.
Perfect. Thanks, Lawrence. Scott, coming to you next, please.
Yeah, I think we kind of skirted around the topic, but we didn't really address it head on, which is, if you really want teams to stay involved and embrace the OKR methodology, it's absolutely necessary to get them to craft their own goals, right? So what we run into constantly is the debate over whether, to cascade or not cascade. So a lot of organizations will go into the OKR methodology thinking, okay, I set the top level company goals. I publish those. Everybody, the next level down needs to create those based on those goals. Next level down, waits for the OKRs to be drafted ahead of them, and then they draft their goals. Obviously that process can take a long time, so you get halfway through a quarter before all the goals are set. But B, most importantly, if you do that approach, then you're not going to get the involvement from the team members themselves. You're not going to involve the key stakeholders to get ownership in the entire process. So we advocate a top-down, bottom-up process. So yes, absolutely, executives need to set the top-level company strategic goals. But once those are published, we advocate a bottoms-up approach where the individual teams then craft their goals and then share theirs up throughout the organization. And that's, again, where this OKR champion comes into play, where you need to tie those goals together and facilitate a process to garden those goals and make sure that you're all of them are set appropriately, and they do in fact link up to top level company objectives, and there aren't duplicates and there aren't conflicting goals throughout the organization. But the key point there is that if the teams themselves aren't crafting their goals, they're not going to be, they're not going to buy into the process nearly as readily as if the goals were handed to them.
Great, thanks, Scott. And Matt?
My top tip is going to be to not forget to actually frame in a positive way why we're doing the OKR process itself. And be clear and communicate. As Lauren said, this is not about micromanagement. This is not about busy work. This is a way of providing focus and autonomy, and really make sure you answer that question of what's in it for me, down to every team and every individual, and frame how this business process is going to actually be valuable for them, not just another thing you're asking them to do in their already busy days.
Perfect. Thanks, all three of you. I know I put you on the spot there, so thank you for taking my question on board. That's kind of bringing our conversation to a close today. And I know we've had a little bit of sound issues, so apologise to our listeners for that today. So if today's episode has risen any questions for anyone, then please feel free to reach out to Matt Tucker and Scott Campbell at Koan or Lawrence Walsh at There Be Giants. And thanks for generally joining us on today's episode of Giant Talk. If you enjoyed the session, we'd love you to pop over to your podcast provider of choice and leave us a review. Preferably a 5-star one would be great. And just a final note, just to say thank you to Matt, Scott and Lawrence for joining me today. And we'll see you on the next episode of Giant Talk.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jenny.
Bye.